The humid air hung heavy in Los Lanes, a village nestled amidst the emerald embrace of the South American countryside. It was 1980, a time when the rhythm of life was dictated by the sun and the whispers of the wind rustling through the sugarcane fields. 18-year-old Maso was spending his holidays at his uncle's farm, a sprawling expanse of land where cattle grazed peacefully under the watchful gaze of the Andes Mountains. Nights in Los Llanos were typically quiet affairs, the villagers retiring early after a simple supper. But this night, a restlessness stirred within Maso, keeping him from sleep. He lay on his cot, the thatched roof above him a dark textured canvas. The rhythmic creaking of the fan offered little solace. He rose and stepped out onto the porch, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, dancing shadows across the yard. A sudden commotion broke the stillness. A cacophony of panicked mooing erupted from the nearby animal shelter, where his uncle kept his herd of cows. Maso frowned. The cows were usually placid creatures. He peered towards the sky, noticing a rapid shift in the weather. Dark, ominous clouds were gathering, swallowing the stars one by one. A storm was brewing. He suspected the cows were sensing the approaching tempest. Concerned for their safety, he grabbed a flickering lantern and ventured towards the shelter. The scene that greeted him was one of utter chaos. The cows were agitated, their eyes wide with fear, their hooves churning the muddy ground. They milled about restlessly, their moans echoing in the still night air. The wind picked up, carrying with it the first fat drops of rain. Maso knew he had to move them to the inner stable quickly. He struggled to herd the frantic animals, their powerful bodies bumping against him as they sought an escape from their unseen terror. As he guided the cows towards the stable, a strange, sickeningly sweet smell assaulted his nostrils. It was the cloying odor of rotting meat, growing stronger with each trip he made between the shelter and the stable. He wrinkled his nose, trying to pinpoint the source. With each cow safely inside, the smell intensified. Finally, with only a handful of cows remaining, he noticed it. Near the edge of the shelter, half hidden in the shadows, lay the carcass of an old cow. Its body was a gruesome tableau of blood and exposed bone, picked clean by scavengers. The sight sent a shiver down Maso's spine. He'd never seen anything so violated. A wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to scream, to run, but a primal fear rooted him to the spot. Then he heard it. A whistle thin and reedy, slicing through the wind and rain. It was a sound that chilled him to the bone, a sound he knew from the hushed whispers of his elders, the whistle of El Silbón. The name echoed in his mind, conjuring images of the terrifying figure from the legends. He remembered the stories his relatives used to tell, tales of a tall, gaunt man who roamed the plains, carrying a sack of bones on his back, his presence heralded by his haunting whistle. They said he was a cursed soul, condemned to wander the earth for eternity, preying on those foolish enough to venture out at night. Panic seized Maso. He knew he had to escape. He turned to run, but as he did, a long, distorted shadow stretched across the ground, cast by the flickering lantern. He looked up and his blood ran cold. Standing before him, silhouetted against the storm clouds, was a figure of immense height, easily over 19 feet tall. He wore a tattered straw hat, and his body seemed to be made of shadows and bone, with strips of flesh hanging from him like macabre decorations. It was El Silbón, the whistler, the bone carrier. The creature's eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with an unholy light. He raised a hand, impossibly long and skeletal, towards Maso. The young man's breath hitched in his throat. He knew he was facing death itself. He screamed and stumbled backward, his legs moving almost independently of his will. He glanced over his shoulder, desperate for an escape route. El Silbón began to move towards him, each step deliberate, each step an eternity. The rattling of bones in the sack on his back grew louder, a macabre percussion accompanying the storm. Just as El Silbón reached out to grab him, a furious barking erupted from the darkness. A small, furry figure darted into the light, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It was Maso's dog, a scruffy mutt he'd rescued from the streets. El Silbón recoiled as if struck, his shadowy form flickering. He turned and vanished into the storm, leaving only the echo of his whistle and the rattling of bones in the wind. Maso collapsed to his knees, his body trembling. He hugged his dog tightly, burying his face in its fur. He knew he owed his life to the animal. If it hadn't been for his loyal companion, he would have been another victim of El Silbón, his bones added to the ghastly collection in the creature's sack. The storm raged on, but Maso no longer feared it. He had faced the legendary horror and survived. He knew he would never forget the terror of that encounter, the sight of El Silbón, the sound of his whistle. He had heard the whispers of the legend before, but now he understood the true meaning of fear. He had looked into the eyes of death and lived to tell the tale. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that El Silbón was still out there, waiting in the shadows, whistling his mournful tune, forever searching for his next victim. The following days in Los Llanes were tinged with an unsettling quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape washed clean, but the fear lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Maso found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, listening for the telltale whistle that heralded El Silbón's approach. Sleep offered little respite, his dreams haunted by the creature's towering figure and the rattling of bones. He sought out the elders of the village, hoping to glean more about El Silbón, to understand the curse that drove him. They shared their stories, whispers passed down through generations, each tale more chilling than the last. They spoke of a spoiled youth from a wealthy family, centuries ago, whose insatiable appetite for deer meat led him to commit a horrific act of patricide. He'd murdered his own father in a fit of rage for failing to bring home the desired meat, then tricked his mother into cooking it. The grandfather, upon discovering the gruesome truth, cursed the boy, flayed his back with a whip, rubbed chili into the wounds, and banished him with a sack of his father's bones and 2 ferocious dogs. Condemned to wander the plains for eternity, he became El Silbón, the Whistler, forever seeking vengeance and driven by an insatiable hunger for bones. Some said he was a shapeshifter, able to transform into animals to lure unsuspecting victims. Others claimed he could control the weather, summoning storms to conceal his presence. But one detail remained consistent throughout the tales: his fear of dogs. This was the only sliver of hope, the only defense against the terrifying entity. Maso's dog, now a constant companion, was never far from his side. The villagers, too, were on edge. They reinforced their homes, kept their livestock close, and avoided venturing out after dark. The joy and tranquility that had once defined Los Llanes were replaced by a palpable sense of dread. The laughter of children was muted, replaced by hushed whispers and anxious glances. Maso, however, couldn't shake the feeling that El Silbón was still watching him, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. He felt a strange connection to the creature, a sense of shared isolation. He understood the pain of rejection, the sting of anger, though he could never condone the monstrous acts El Silbón committed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the fields, Maso found himself drawn to the animal shelter, the site of his terrifying encounter. He stood at the edge of the enclosure, the scent of damp earth and hay filling his nostrils. He closed his eyes, trying to recreate the events of that fateful night. He could almost hear the panicked mooing of the cows, the chilling whistle, the rattling of bones. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind him. He whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat. Standing in the shadows was an old woman, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness. It was Mama Elena, the village's shaman, a woman known for her wisdom and her connection to the spirit world. "You seek answers, child," she said, her voice raspy but gentle. Maso nodded, unable to speak. "El Silbón is a creature of pain," she continued, "a soul trapped between worlds. He seeks not just bones but also recognition, a twisted form of acknowledgement." "But how can we appease him?" Maso asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mama Elena shook her head. "There is no appeasing him. His pain is too deep, his rage too consuming. The only way to survive is to respect him, to acknowledge his existence, but never to invite him in." She gestured towards his dog, who sat patiently at his feet. Your dog is your protector, a guardian against the darkness. Never underestimate the power of loyalty and love. Mama Elena's words resonated with Maso. He realized that El Silbón was not just a monster, but a tragic figure, a victim of his own rage and the cruelty of the world. He understood that he could never truly escape the fear, but he could learn to live with it, to respect the power of the legend, and to cherish the bond he shared with his dog, his shield against the darkness. He left the animal shelter, the moon casting a gentle glow on his path. He walked home, his dog by his side, the fear of El Silbón still present, but now tempered with a newfound understanding. He knew that El Silbón would always be a part of the landscape of Los Llanes, a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of even the most beautiful places. But he also knew that he was not alone. He had his dog, his family, and the wisdom of the elders to guide him, and as long as he remembered the lessons he had learned, he would survive. The encounter with Mama Elena had shifted something within Maso. The raw terror he felt towards El Silbón began to transmute into a complex mix of fear, pity, and a strange sense of respect. He understood that El Silbón wasn't simply a monster to be vanquished, but a tragic figure, a product of immense pain and suffering. He couldn't forgive the creature's horrific actions, but he could comprehend the source of his rage. Life in Los Llanes slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of everyday life, but it no longer held the same paralyzing grip. People went about their routines, tending to their fields, caring for their livestock, but with a heightened awareness of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of the light. The stories of El Silbón continued to be told, not as campfire tales to scare children, but as cautionary reminders of the consequences of unchecked anger and the importance of respecting the delicate balance between the human world and the spiritual realm. Maso, however, felt a pull towards the legend, an almost morbid curiosity. He spent hours talking to the older villagers, collecting every fragment of information he could find about El Silbón's origins, his habits, his weaknesses. He learned the specific tune of El Silbón's whistle, a mournful melody that could curdle the blood. He discovered the creature's aversion to dogs and the chili-infused whip used in his original curse. He even started venturing out at dusk, his dog always by his side, drawn by an inexplicable need to understand the creature that had so profoundly impacted his life. He would stand at the edge of the fields, listening for the faintest hint of the chilling whistle, searching the shadows for the towering figure. He wasn't trying to hunt El Silbón. He simply wanted to understand him. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Maso found himself near the old ceiba tree, a gnarled giant that stood sentinel over the plains. It was said that El Silbón often rested in its branches, his long limbs draped among the leaves. Maso sat at the base of the tree, his dog nestled beside him, and closed his eyes, listening to the whispers of the wind rustling through the leaves. He imagined El Silbón, the tormented soul, burdened by his sack of bones, forever wandering the plains, seeking solace that he could never find. He thought of the pain the creature must have endured, the betrayal, the rage that consumed him. A strange sense of empathy began to bloom within him. Suddenly, a faint sound reached his ears. It was the whistle, thin and reedy, carried on the evening breeze. It was closer than he had ever heard it before. His dog growled softly, its fur bristling. Maso's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't move. He wanted to see him, to finally come face to face with the creature that had haunted his dreams. The whistle grew louder, closer. Maso opened his eyes and saw a shadow moving among the branches of the ceiba tree. It was El Silbón. He was even taller than Maso remembered, his form distorted by the fading light. The sack of bones hung heavy on his back, rattling softly with each movement. Maso didn't run. He didn't scream. He simply watched as El Silbón descended from the tree, his movements slow and deliberate. The creature stopped a few feet away, his shadowy eyes fixed on Maso. For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a silent communion. Then El Silbón did something unexpected. He raised his hand, not in a gesture of aggression, but in what seemed like a gesture of acknowledgement. He held out his hand, revealing the gruesome collection of bones within the sack. It was a macabre offering, a silent plea. Maso didn't reach out. He simply nodded, acknowledging the creature's pain, recognizing his existence. He understood that Silbón wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for recognition, for someone to see him, not as a monster, but as a victim. After a moment, Silbón lowered his hand and turned away, his shadowy form melting into the darkness. The whistle faded into the night, leaving behind an eerie silence. Maso sat there for a long time, his dog resting its head on his lap. He had faced Silbón, not with fear or anger, but with understanding. He had seen the creature's pain, and in that moment, he had found a strange sort of peace. He knew that Silbón would always be a part of his life, a reminder of the darkness that existed within the world, but he also knew that he no longer needed to be afraid. He had learned to live with the legend, to respect its power, and to find his own light in the face of the darkness. He understood that Silbón wasn't just a monster. He was a mirror, reflecting the darker aspects of human nature, the pain, the anger, the isolation. And by understanding Silbón, Maso had come to a deeper understanding of himself. The encounter at the ceiba tree marked a turning point for Maso. He returned to the village a changed man. The fear that had once consumed him was replaced by a quiet understanding, a deep respect for the power of the legend, and a profound sense of peace. He no longer sought out Silbón, but he no longer feared him either. He understood that the creature was a part of the landscape, a manifestation of the region's history and folklore, a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of even the most idyllic settings. He shared his experience with Mama Elena, who listened intently, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "You have seen the truth, child," she said. Silbón is not just a monster. He is a reflection of our own darkness. He embodies the pain, the anger, the isolation that we all carry within us. Maso began to see the world differently. He noticed the subtle ways in which fear shaped the lives of the villagers, the hushed conversations, the anxious glances, the reluctance to venture out after dark. He realized that the legend of Silbón was more than just a story. It was a symbol of the unresolved traumas and unspoken fears that haunted the community. He started working with Mama Elena, learning about the traditional healing practices of the region, the power of herbs, the importance of ritual, and the delicate balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. He discovered a gift for connecting with people, for listening to their stories, for understanding their pain. He became a bridge between the villagers and the spirit world, helping them to confront their fears, to heal their wounds, and to find peace within themselves. He never forgot his encounter with Silbón. The image of the towering figure, the sound of the chilling whistle, the rattling of bones, these were etched into his memory, reminders of the darkness that existed in the world. But he no longer saw Silbón as a terrifying monster. He saw him as a tragic figure, a victim of his own pain, a symbol of the consequences of unchecked anger and the importance of forgiveness. Years passed. Maso grew into a respected figure in Los Llanos, a healer, a storyteller, a guardian of the community's traditions. He carried the stories of Silbón, not as tales of terror, but as cautionary reminders of the importance of compassion, forgiveness, and understanding. He taught the children the tune of Silbón's whistle, not to frighten them, but to remind them of the delicate balance between light and darkness, and the power of respect. He never again encountered Silbón, but he felt his presence in the wind rustling through the sugarcane fields, in the shadows dancing beneath the ceiba tree, in the hushed whispers of the villagers. He understood that Silbón was a part of Los Llanos, a part of its history, a part of its soul. And as long as the stories were told, as long as the memory of his pain was kept alive, Silbón would continue to wander the plains, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within us all, and the importance of choosing compassion over fear. One evening, as the sun set over the Andes Mountains, painting the sky in a breathtaking display of colors, Maso sat beneath the ceiba tree, his dog, now old and gray, resting beside him. He closed his eyes, listening to the whispers of the wind, the rustling of the leaves, the distant sounds of the village. He felt a sense of peace, a deep connection to the land, to the community, to the spirit world. He thought of El Silbón, the tormented soul, forever wandering the plains. He knew that the creature would never find peace, but he hoped that his stories, his teachings, his life, would help to ease the pain of others, to prevent them from succumbing to the darkness that had consumed El Silbón. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Maso opened his eyes and smiled. He knew that the legend of El Silbón would live on, a reminder of the darkness, but also a testament to the power of hope, compassion, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And he knew that as long as the stories were told, El Silbón, though forever trapped in his tragic existence, would continue to serve as a silent guardian of Los Llanes, a reminder of the delicate balance between light and shadow, and the enduring power of love.